if there's one piece of advice that I would give to you is coach your kids or be involved. And it doesn't have to be in sports. So maybe it's that you're into Lego robotics or debating, or that was such a great part of being a parent and such a no-brainer for me. It was just so much fun to be a coach.
Hey, Antony, welcome. Thanks for coming in today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. And it's been a few years since we really got together, and we worked together at Intel for maybe, 12 years or so. Mm-hmm. Give me an update. What you been up to?
Well, thank you for having me, Ian. Great to see your setup and interested in your adventures here in developing your own podcast. I think that's great.
Thanks.
I guess we probably last interacted maybe even before COVID. Because remember, we went all remote kind of the winter of 2021. And then I ended up leaving Intel in June 2021 and joining Facebook. And I was at Facebook until this past summer and left. And since then have been thinking about what my next steps are, as well as running my own, what I'm calling product strategy and market research firm called PMF Insights. So having fun working with startups who are in the early stages of trying to find product market fit and that's trying to, that's what the PMF stands for, and trying to accelerate that time to product market fit through better understanding their customers.
Yeah. How are you finding new business for that or customers, or where did you start with trying to create that new business for yourself?
It started with developing my own website. And so I used the Wix platform in doing that. It took about 4 or 5 weeks. I don't think it's necessarily a professional website, but it's got the basics, kind of who I am, what my history or past experience is, how I would typically work with a client. And the first client I got was somebody that was referred to me by a contact that I had done a lot of leadership coaching with. And it ended up being a person that was in an accelerator program in Long Beach. And I've been working with him for about 3 or 4 months. And he is a classic kind of example of who I might work with. He's in his mid-20s. He's putting together an app in the gaming space. And I've been doing a lot of more so on the product strategy side versus research, but helping him think through his product, the customer journey, making sure that he's addressing key needs, and then helping him even most recently put together his investment pitch. He had 5 minutes to invest to a bunch of folks. He was looking for $500,000, and it was quite incredible to see him pack it all into just 5 minutes.
Wow. That's a real business if he's shooting for that kind of money. And what is it, just a plain old game, or is this like a more of an involved business? Part of
the experience I had with him was pivoting. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, it was more toward trying to bring gamers together. So there's a lot of social isolation in gaming. And so people, even going back to my work at Intel, I know that gaming, a lot of gamers are in essence in a tribe. They have their friends they game with. And so this was originally designed to bring people together. So they might be playing World of Warcraft, and it would be an app that would bring people together so they could game together, not game in isolation.
Yeah.
And then working with him, we decided to do a pivot, and he's now more looking at helping gamers develop user-generated content. And so when this is a huge trend that's happening in gaming, and there's a lot of people that need basic education on how to do that. And so this is in essence a two-way marketplace that would bring together what he calls learners as well as experts that would be teaching the basics of how to create user-generated content.
Yeah, connecting those people up that have made other pieces of stuff for a game and know the whole process, how to get that installed in your computer, how to start learning the tools.
I recall you were a gamer, and Minecraft, a lot of these games, it's much more gamers having their own elements incorporated into the game which they generate versus just simply playing a game.
Sure. That's cool. Yeah, that changing that social element from being like broadly trying to connect people, which is definitely a a market other big companies are trying to serve, and it's a challenging startup to make, to this other one seems like a cool idea to, focus in on a portion of the gaming market and grow from there. Anyway, well, good luck to him, of course. Coming back to you, you went to Facebook for a while. You were working at Intel for a bit, or a long career. You told me 21 years, I think.
Correct.
Which is pretty incredible. What did you find different between those companies, or like what's it like working for those big companies versus trying to start your own business?
There's huge differences in going from Intel to Facebook, or what now we call Meta. The culture was completely different. The pace of innovation was hypercharged. At Intel, we were essentially working in silicon, or our team was driving insights into the evolution of different processors and what the capabilities that we would include in those processors. And those were typically 2 to 3 time year horizons.
Yeah, years until your insight would turn into something.
Yeah. Real. And whereas at Facebook, it was almost, I would describe as a weekly product development cycle. Yeah. And so I know for the average Facebook user, you might be using Facebook and you're constantly saying, why did they change that? Or that's weird. This used to be over there. Now I have to do it this way. Facebook is constantly evolving the experience.
Yeah.
And so on pretty much a weekly basis, we were launching new features. We were looking at understanding whether they were moving our key KPIs. If they weren't, stopping them, looking at coming up with new ones. So it was just a much faster product development cycle.
Is there 2 portions of the research there? Like one that is doing this longer term thinking and one that's doing the UX, move the button around and, what's our small feature level fixes? Or is it mostly just an iterative, let's get a week's worth done?
Yeah, I think it was mostly evaluative, meaning we were constantly testing or coming up with new features or new ways of interacting with the app. And part of that is Facebook's time horizon is kind of 6 to 9 months, or maybe 12 months. Nobody's really thinking beyond 12 months. Whereas you'll recall at Intel, where we would be, a lot of our research was very focused on longer term trends and how people were going to use technology. And at Facebook, it's not attention deficit disorder, but it's what can I have these goals over the next 6 months and I need to make these changes, versus nobody's really thinking about, maybe they are, but the bulk of what we were doing was trying to impact kind of the six to 9 months.
Yeah, that makes sense that the scales would shift that way. Did it feel like there wasn't enough looking into the future, or like no one had a handle on like what is our customer or our long-term goal? Or was it like that's Zuck's job to do, and
that's interesting you raise Zuck, and that I would even go back to one of your questions of what was the difference. One of the big differences that suddenly I was working in a company that was founder led. So Zuckerberg, he is still very much in control, very much involved, versus coming from Intel, where there was a CEO, but it was much different. And to Zuckerberg's credit, he would meet probably twice a month on Thursday mornings, would do an open Q&A with the entire company and took any questions, was very involved in most product decisions. And that was very different working in a founder-led company versus kind of Intel, where the founder, I would argue, was Andy Grove, or maybe even at the end when I first joined, Craig Barrett. But one of the big differences is they have personal investment in the company, and it's not just kind of a CEO with a bunch of stock options and a compensation plan.
And a tenure. The Intel CEOs, it's like 10 years maybe is your kind of tenure you do, or maybe before, or say, like there could be some shorter amount of time, but it was a position you were passing through where Zuckerberg,
it's very much his baby. It's he would send emails to the team. I happened to work on Facebook stories. If there was something on stories that he didn't like or he was confused with, we would hear about it. And so he was very involved. And that was a huge difference, having kind of being in a founder-led company, which is crazy. When I was there, I think it has about 60,000 employees, but he still had a very firm imprint. And so he was also, I think, taking a lot of that longer term perspective, or his leadership team was.
Yeah. I've been impressed how the company has stuck with VR and AR as a thing. Changing the whole name to Meta is in that vein, but Intel was very different that way, that we would get into a product line or try something out that was pretty cutting edge. For a while, it was a TV. They started a TV service while I was there. There's all these different things they were trying out, a streaming TV service before Netflix was really a big thing. And then, that lasts for a year or two, and they're like, this is going to be tough to make money, or this isn't going to make as much money as chips. We're out. And Zuckerberg, as that founder-led person, has been able to say, oh no, we're going to make this long-term bet. I'm investing myself, I'm investing my company, and we're sticking with it.
It's a great point, Ian, because if you think of Intel, I would argue that Intel had AWS about 10 years before that actually happened. It was called Intel Online Services. They built a bunch of data centers around the world. And probably after, like you said, 2 or 3 years, they gave it up. Intel had really a tablet. Well, before that, they did it. They gave it up.
MP3 player.
Intel had an MP3 player. Intel was doing streaming. Intel had as you mentioned, the streaming services. So it is weird that Intel just didn't have the patience. And maybe that is, again, like we're talking about, CEO-led or founder-led. They were always having to respond to shareholders. And so if there wasn't the return, they had to move away. Probably Zuckerberg is making a 10-year bet on the metaverse, and he can make that call. He doesn't, that's all up to him, and he's making that huge investment, which again is probably really fun. I noticed you had a couple of quests over there, but it's still 5 to 10 years out, but he continues to make a huge investment in that.
Yeah, the AWS/Intel, what'd you call it?
Intel Online Services.
Intel Online Services is maybe the best example. Like a lot of those things that Intel's gotten in and out of, it's probably smart. Like they weren't going to be easy businesses. They weren't near the core competency.
In fact,
Intel might have been very good at them.
Yeah. Right. Renee James, who said you told me lives close to you, she was running that. And they were building them all over the world, and
that was a bad business to get out of in the end, right?
Right.
You stick with that,
but
probably would.
It was probably 10 years premature.
Yeah,
yeah.
Who knows what the company or what the world would look like? There's the alternate universe, I guess. So yeah, talking about work a little more. What do you think of as a couple of your big success points, or like what made you feel successful in all that time?
Wow, that's a huge question. As we were preparing for the podcast, you had asked me when I had got started. And as I had mentioned, this sounds odd, but when I joined Intel, it was really just the beginning of the PC revolution.
Yeah.
And I remember doing research. Again, this might sound crazy, but we were visiting small businesses who had yet to use a desktop computer and trying to understand kind of why they weren't adopting.
Yeah.
And so one of the kind of early successes, I would say, is really trying to enlarge the scope or the TAM of at that time, the desktop market. And what we were finding is ease of use was a huge deal. And Intel wasn't really thinking about it. And in fact, I don't even think Microsoft was thinking about it. And I can remember actually going up to Microsoft and sharing research we'd done on PCs. And this was all about how do we get the mainstream to adopt more PCs. And we were really pushing hard on ease of use. And even Microsoft still quite hadn't figured that out. And so I think that was not the single reason why millions and millions of people and most households got a PC, but it was an important hurdle to get over, to get past the early adopters and to get more of the mainstream.
Yeah. So for you, did that feel like this kind of personal success level of like, I got the company to notice something? I found an insight by doing this market research. I saw people aren't having a good user experience and aren't having an easy time using these things. And then you kind of got the company, or multiple companies in a way, Microsoft and Intel, to look into that, or to kind of shine the spotlight on it a little bit more.
To be more aware of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say I single-handedly did that, but as part of that, as I think back into those early days, probably one of my biggest accomplishments was getting the engineers to come out into the field with us. And this had never been done before. Both of us are based in Oregon. There's a zip code in Oregon, 970 219, which is where a lot of the engineers at Intel live and lived at the time. And I used to call it Product Development 97129, which is essentially they were building products for themselves and their neighbors, all of whom worked at Intel and all of whom had engineering degrees. And a breakthrough was to actually convince engineering management to have those engineers come out into the field with me and the team. And we did that, and it was mind-blowing for these engineers. I remember we went to Sacramento and we took them with us, and they saw in person how people were struggling to connect printers, to update drivers, just very basic things that they had thought that everybody knew. And so it was very important for them to see that in person versus me or the team going out and doing this research and coming back and in a PowerPoint slide deck saying the importance of ease of use. It was very impactful when they came out with us and they saw that for themselves. They then took this back into the company, and they also then became advocates for this. So it was hugely important to get them out into the field with us and do the interviews and meet real people and talk to them about what their experience was using PCs.
Yeah. How do you describe that? Like, how did that make you feel?
It felt really great. It was, I remember it was a kind of recruiting them and convincing their management team that it was worth their while to take these engineers on a 3 or 4 day trip was very challenging. And I had to talk about what the potential ROI would be. Just a ton of effort in convincing them to let them do that. And then having them come out, it was just very, it just felt really great because I would see these same engineers and they would always come up to me, and the first thing they would say is, wasn't that so great when you took us out into the field? And it makes me think completely different how I approach thinking about what capabilities that for them they would put on the processor to help people get a better experience in using their PC. So it was very fulfilling for me when they would meet me afterwards.
Yeah, that sounds rewarding, that kind of teaching aspect of it, or the having an idea and being able to share with people like, hey, look, this is super important. I've noticed a lot of people in my network have become professors or teachers or something. I've been surprised at that, you know, a lot of the really smart people I know have then spent their life doing that. And maybe that's kind of the core of it. The heart of it is that feeling of, I've got an idea, and when I share it and the other person starts having that idea, it gives you a lot of joy.
Definitely.
So you also reminded me of something one of my organizational behavior professors would talk about, is the politics, and how like that ends up being maybe one of the biggest parts of your career, or one of the most important skills to have, is managing up and down in the organization and getting people to do stuff. Like you were saying, allowing you to bring the engineers out into the field. And, you know, how has that skill served you over time, or how have you tried to improve that ability to influence people?
Working at any large company, and most of my experience has been working at large technology companies, and it is extremely important to manage up, especially for, as you know, Ian, us being in market research, we're not always top of mind for people. And so, especially at Intel, a lot of the years we were reporting into the CMO. And so an important part of managing up is to make sure that they are aware of what you're working on and what the impact the team is driving. And maybe not in a good way, a significant amount of my time at Intel, especially in the last years, was doing a lot of managing up and simply educating people, showing them how we were driving impact. I don't necessarily think that was a hugely beneficial use of my time, but it was just the reality of the situation. And I think that working in a large company, that is just, sadly, that's what you have to do. You have to manage up. You have to be present, especially for us, again, in research, where we may not always be top of mind. We always had to fight our way in. Sometimes I would say claw our way into the discussion and make sure that the voice of the user is represented. And when they're making decisions, it's not that we strive to completely drive them in a different direction. But ultimately, what we want to do is make sure that when they're making that decision, they're taking the end user into perspective. They're balancing what is the business objective, and they're balancing that with what are the insights that we are receiving, what is the best decision we should make. And that requires a lot of managing up and pushing that up.
Yeah. Any good stories you have from that time, or like times when you've had to manage up?
Yeah. In 2016 or 2017, there was a relatively new CEO at Intel. His name was Brian Kursanich. And for some reason, he was very negative on the PC business. And I think maybe he was trying to get it sold off. But
What do you mean by the PC business?
Probably at Intel, I think at the time, he was very focused on the data center. And he viewed the PC as a dying business.
Like the client, the laptops and desktops that consumers and businesses do.
Exactly. Just the general selling PCs, whether they be desktops or laptops, to consumers or businesses. He felt that was not a good business for Intel to be in. And he was often stating this publicly. And as we were looking at research at the time, we were not seeing the same thing. We were still seeing that the PC was a very critical element to somebody's life, whether they were a consumer and they were doing their own work, whether they were doing education, whether they were entertaining themselves through gaming.
Coming to the time point then too, like phones and tablets were exploded already. They were a huge thing. And, VR, AR kind of things were burgeoning, like, there's going to be these new platforms. And so I guess his feeling was the PC is this declining a place where you're going to need to use that as much in the future.
Right. Who needs a PC? I can do everything on my smartphone. And I remember him saying, I can do my expenses. I can do all my approvals. I don't need I don't need this business. And again, we were not seeing that. Yeah. You're totally correct. Everybody needs a smartphone. Nobody can imagine even 2017, 2018 life without a smartphone. Nevertheless, the PC was really still playing an important role. And so I led an initiative where we looked at what we called the state of the consumer PC, and basically came back and said that the PC is still a very important part of the lives for consumers. No, it is not on the level of the smartphone, but it still serves a lot of important roles. And maybe the most controversial element of that analysis was we utilized some social media listening techniques and found that the negative narrative on the PC was actually being driven by our CEO, meaning that when there was news articles saying the death of the PC, he was often quoted in these news articles. And so as part of my analysis, I brought that, not just the research and the insights that told us that people still use the PC, it's critical. We even did a study where we took the PC away from consumers for 2 weeks and talked to them about what that was like, and came back and found that it was extremely critical. But again, part of that analysis was showing that the narrative of the PC being dead was being driven by the Intel CEO at the time, Brian Kursanich.
That's so funny.
And that was quite controversial. People thought that would be crazy for me to bring that forth. But I did, and it was very factual. And that research, or that entire analysis, which at the time we called State of the Consumer PC, I think served a really important role for the incoming head of the PC business unit, whose name was at the time Gregory Bryant, who used that to really see that the PC still was a very important business. And over the next couple of years, he scaled that business up from about 6 or 7 billion in quarterly revenue to 10 billion.
Wow. Yeah, found the growth, even though it was supposedly this dying thing. Yeah, pretty cool. And in that time, losing Apple and things too, or there's like other reasons to shrink and still finding lots of growth.
Right.
And I think it was a interesting time period, and still is. Well, yeah, maybe enough about business stuff. Maybe what else should we talk about? What do you find? What are some other good achievement points from your life? Or like when you think about all this, when you think back across all this time, what are times when you felt like, hey, that was a moment in my life where I felt successful?
I don't know if I can pinpoint actual moments.
Go ahead.
I mean, my wife and I are lucky to have two boys, and they're both in their early 20s, and we're in the process of becoming empty nesters, and probably we both think back to how great it was raising our boys. And that doesn't mean that, I know you're a new parent.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you stop being a parent. I'm lucky that both my parents are still alive, and they're still very much involved. And so even though they're in their early 20s, we're still involved as parents, but we're not as involved, obviously, when they were much younger. But that's probably, I would say, the most successful thing when I think back is just the amazing and fun time that I had with my wife in raising our boys from 0 to being young adults.
Yeah, definitely. It does seem like one of the most rewarding parts of our lives. It's a trite idea, but true nonetheless, right? What are some of your biggest challenges from that time? Like, is it when they're a little kid or a teenager time, or what's the tough part I should be looking forward to of this parenting gig?
It's definitely switches. You could almost chunk it up by kind of grade school. Like it's kind of easy in the beginning, like from 0 to 7 or 8 years old. I mean, it's very easy to switch their attention. We used to, if they were acting up, I would just simply pick them up and turn them upside down, and they would start laughing. And so it was easy to kind of switch the situation. It was easy to play with them. They were big into Legos, into Playmobil. So it's actually kind of maybe an easier part. I think the harder part of parenting starts when maybe it's 5th or 6th or 7th grade. They're going into middle school. It just gets more complicated. And then you're into the high school years. You have to be more involved. But again, they're all different phases, and there are different challenges depending on the phase, but there's also fun elements. So when they're getting to be in middle school, you can start to talk to them a little bit more, not like adults, but you can have more conversations about what's going on with the world. And as they get into high school, there's a different set of challenges that you have to deal with as a parent, but it's all kind of, I don't know, maybe you don't remember the super bad parts, but it's all kind of fun. And when you ask me, what I think of success, that's been the most, enjoyable part
absolutely
of my life.
Is it as they're growing up, is it that the consequences are bigger? Like if they fail at something, or what makes it tougher?
It's important to fail too, right? Like they can fail, but that's true. Like consequences are, when they're 3, like you have your son Ian, and there's no consequences for what he's doing at the moment.
Yeah, he could fall and hurt his head,
right?
Or
sure,
run out into traffic.
Yeah, he's not going to make any
some physical stuff I worry about.
Decisions that are going to impact him later. But
right. Yeah. He's not going to post anything to anywhere that's going to haunt him for the
rest
of his life.
I mean, that'll be a different challenge for you. I mean, when I remember them both being in middle school, and that's when Snapchat and social media. So it'll just be, and even at, working at Facebook, there's different age groups use technology much more differently. And so how your son and daughter use social media will be completely different than how my boys used it. It just kind of changes constantly.
Yeah. I think a lot about AI and how that's going to rapidly change things, or whether, my kids will need to go to college, or because there'll be some tool they can use that does all that for you, or, there's I don't know, the world could just rapidly shift over the next 15 years.
Or there's a great podcast I listened to by Morgan Housel, I think is his last name. And he's got a new book out, and he actually talks about how little things change. We may, yes, AI is going to have a significant impact on how we work and how we educate ourselves. There's no question about that. But probably the fundamental issues that you will face as a parent are probably going to be the very same that I faced as a parent. So his point is that we think that things are changing all the time, but they're actually not. The same challenges
too, that you're growing up a lot in those college years, and fledging from your parents and, learning to go out into the world, and that kind of behavior and time will still be necessary for kids or young adults or whatever. So the place of the college will probably still be there, but maybe you'll just be doing something much different. You'll still spend 4 years doing something.
Yeah, it's an important element. If you're fortunate enough to go, we both went. It is an important 4 years of your life to just develop into a person.
Yeah.
But I sure think for your Ian, when he goes to college, yes, I think it'll be different. I mean, the cost is outrageous, and there's so many kids that come out of college with just massive debt burdens that I just don't think that's sustainable. So I do hope that element of it changes.
Yeah. How do you think the time you spent in college, what did you study in college, and how did that lead to, now you've had this long career? Like, has it mattered what you did then, or what did you learn then that you used all these, 30 plus years after?
Yeah, I of course, being from Canada, I studied up in Canada and did an undergrad in history and political science. So a liberal arts education that probably today is not looked upon highly. And a lot of kids may go like, I'm not going to do that. That being said, I think what the best thing I learned from that is writing, the ability to communicate. I think it's also doing that education also leads you to maybe having a richer life. I'm interested in history. I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in how the world, it drives a certain level of intellectual curiosity, which I think is great. At the time, I really enjoyed that. And that has been what I've said to my boys as well. Like, study what you like, because probably if you're studying something that you enjoy and like, you'll do well at it. And that's really what matters.
Yeah. They're both in college now, or what's their?
One is finishing up, and one has.
What have they chosen to study, or what's the?
They've both decided to go into business and finance and marketing, kind of similar to what their parents do, I guess. But there's a lot of kids that do that, and that's, again, just like what I said, that's what they found interesting, and that's,
you didn't pressure them to go.
No,
another. You thought it was just
absolutely
do whatever
not.
you want.
Yeah.
That's a tough call,
well, not, I mean,
tough
but there is
that
wouldn't be totally honest. I mean, if they said, I'm going to do a major in art history, okay, well, I'm giving
here's
a
the jobs
stretch
that could have
example, right? Like, be cognizant of what you do study is going to be your launching pad going forward. And so you do have to bring in that practical reality into that.
Yeah, you mentioned how you're from Canada. One thing I never knew about is like, do you have a lot of family back there, or how do you play between the two countries and your cultures there or something?
Yes, my parents are living in Canada. They live in Victoria. My sister lives in British Columbia as well. My brother lives in the United Kingdom, and uncles, aunts, and cousins are still up there. But there's not, I've been living in the US really since the early 90s at this point.
And you're pretty much the only one then.
Yeah. And there's not, it's funny, my wife is American, but in a way, we grew up in the same culture. Again, this may sound kind of stupid, but we both watched Gilligan's Island or all those shows in the 70s and 80s. The culture in Canada is very influenced by the US. And so I would say our upbringing, at least from a Hollywood perspective, was very similar. So there's not a ton of differences. Although, we go back quite a bit, I do see the subtle differences that exist between the two countries. And it's not just that there's healthcare, and it's not just that there's gun control, or at least Canadians like to continually push that as what differentiates Canada from the US. There's more differences than that. But at a high level, it's been, it's almost like I would say that Seattle, Portland, Vancouver are very similar. They're in the Northwest. Some people call it Cascadia. That's a very similar culture and way of living. And it's very different as opposed to being in Toronto or Philadelphia or New York, where I would say that is also kind of an East Coast mentality. There's probably more differences there than Canada versus the United States. It really depends on what region of North America you live in. And I think there's different and unique cultural.
And you think like North Dakota or something is probably just more similar to Northern Canada stuff too? Or like that there's like
probably, sort of, maybe Alberta. But I really think that the example of the Northwest of Vancouver and Seattle and Portland is a very unique place to live. And when you're up in Victoria or Vancouver, it feels and tastes very similar to being in Portland or Seattle.
When Adrian and I were filling out our ethnicities and things on our birth certificate for our new baby, it's like, I don't know what to write on that stuff anymore. It seems so silly. It's like, as the more and more generations we are away from some original country far away, it's like, I just want to be able to check on that American. Does that ever ring true to you too, of like, this Canadian versus American kind of thing?
Yeah. I think one thing I've noticed is, and I'll speak at a North American level, is that immigrants, and this is compared to what I've experienced having lived in Europe for a couple of years, immigrants coming to North America within one generation, I feel, switch or integrate themselves, good or bad, I'm not passing judgment, but I think much more quickly become Americans or become Canadians. Whether it's in Canada, there tends to be a lot of immigrants from India, and it's amazing in a good way at how quickly suddenly they're really Canadian. Their kids are playing hockey, they're watching Hockey Night in Canada.
Yeah.
They're still, I'm sure, maintaining the basics of their culture, but they've made that switch. And I think in the US, I've experienced a similar situation where there's people coming over and quite quickly they integrate much more quicker, versus Europe, where this is just based on my experience, but I don't feel that they are as welcoming to new immigrants and
European countries,
specifically in France, where I have lived before, and specifically with people from North Africa. It's very evident to me that they struggle to fully integrate into French society. And they're having problems. That country, I believe today, is having problems because they're not doing a good job. I think you could say the same for Germany, of integrating people in that come from different cultures. And so I think that I agree with you, like when you're answering those questions, as you're here longer, they become less relevant because you have integrated into the US, or Canada, whereas I think in France or Germany, they are less successful in integrating, and that's bad for the French and Germans. And so ethnicity matters more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it even comes up within the US, right? Like I grew up in New York, and people ask like, where you're from or something. I'm like, I don't know. I've been in Portland here a long time, and why would I not just say I'm from Oregon or Portland, or at what point am I able to say I'm from here?
Right. Well, I mean, this is my comment to you about, like, I think Vancouver, Seattle, Portland are a region, Cascadia.
Yeah.
And I kind of would identify more with being a Cascadian maybe than being an American or a Canadian.
Yeah.
It's the region that I'm kind of from.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned hockey once. That made me think of what do Canadians think about like hockey in the U.S. or like these warm places, Florida, Nevada, and things getting teams and like people getting into it there. Is that weird? Is that looked upon as positive or negative by general Canadians?
So first preface that I haven't lived in Canada on a regular basis for a long time.
Yeah.
However, as a massive Canadian hockey fan, I do find it bizarre that there is a team called the Florida Panthers, that there's the Phoenix Coyotes, that there are teams in the South, that there's the San Jose Sharks, etc. So as a purist, I do find that odd. However, the NHL is a business, and we lived in the Bay Area for a number of years, and we went to a lot of Sharks games, and the fans are very, they wear the jerseys, they're totally into the Sharks. Yeah. I know in Florida and Tampa Bay, they have huge followings. So a lot of that is from Canadian snowbirds that are down there in the winter. But I guess on the surface, it is weird, but the NHL is a business. They're just trying to expand their TAM, just like we were trying to do at Intel.
Absolutely.
But yeah, as a purist, I do find it bizarre. I'm more of a Chicago, Boston, Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, New York Rangers kind of original six type of person.
That's true. Okay. So the northern U.S. there, New England, those teams are allowed to be considered hockey teams.
And, it's good. Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton. Yeah.
I mean, it's all, well, I haven't looked at the player makeup lately, I guess. Is it all Canadian players still for a long time?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, the Americans, again, don't quote me on this directly, but if you looked at the average roster, I would bet today that 30% are American born, 30% are maybe 35 or 40% are Canadian, the rest are European. So it's a much more multi-ethnic, multi-background league than it was when I was growing up, where you're right, where 9 out of 10 players on the Boston Bruins would all be from Quebec and Ontario up in Canada. But it's changed today. The US is a very, it's probably, the second best hockey country in the world.
Yeah, well, it's a nice thing to say, I suppose. There you go.
Yes, note I said second best.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, so you mentioned your family and your kids. One thing we've been dealing with lately is as our son starts getting older, we have to start thinking about where he's going to go to school and like how to make those decisions around town. And right now the Portland teachers are on strike, and it's the public schools are in turmoil a bit, and that's just like one more sign of like, how do you make this decision of going private schools or public schools, or like how did you guys do that, or where'd your kids go, or was that important to their lives?
Yeah, that was I probably started, which I imagine the same for you all, is where do you buy your house, which is still I think a driving factor in choosing where to live, is what are the good schools. And as I had mentioned, we live down in the Bay Area. We moved up here in 2004, and the very first thing we thought of was where are the good schools? Of course, we thought about the commute distance to Intel, but we're very focused on trying to buy a house that was in a very good elementary school at the time. And so schooling was always a super important part of our decision. Even when we moved, we were lucky enough to find a home in Oak Hills. There's a great public school called Oak Hills Elementary. Both our boys did 1 through 5 there. It was fantastic. And then after Oak Hills, we then faced that decision of, should they continue in public school? What are our private school options? I think it really depends on, I don't think there's any advice I could give. I think it's, what are the circumstances that you and your partner find yourself in? These private schools are expensive, for sure. And it really, what is your public school option? So for example, for you, what is the elementary school here?
Yeah.
Is it West Haven?
We're in the Ainsworth district.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I assume those are very solid schools.
Yeah, we chose this house and our location based on, trying to get good schools that way.
Yeah.
And yet still there's this idea of like, what does good mean? Or how you can go to the private schools, and some of the top ones there, they're definitely super expensive, and they have really nice campuses. They have nice teachers, and like, what do you compare to? Like, how good does it need to be? Is my son or daughter really going to get some bigger value, have a better life, have more happiness? Like, I don't know. And how do you measure that? How do you make a decision about it?
Or should you save your money and put it in their 529?
Yeah.
Or as you mentioned to me, maybe
to buy him some stock.
Ian Jr., by the time he gets to university age, nobody goes to university. I don't think that will be the case. But
right. Like maybe all this is your goal is, let's get them into the best college. So I got to spend the most money now to make sure they're the best prep schools to get to the best college. And then...
Yeah. Having been through that, as I said, I've got one son, he's finishing. And as a parent that has paid for and supported 2 kids that have gone through the U.S. college system, I think there's just so much hoopla. I think that there's so much pressure that you get as parents, and even on the kids, kind of there's so much on what school are you going to and where are you applying to. I remember one counselor said, at the end of the day, wherever they go, they're going to enjoy it. And I felt that was, in retrospect, really good advice. And I think that we as parents got caught up in all that hoopla. College is extremely expensive and it's very stressful, especially when you're, this is a long way for you, but when they get to 10th and 11th grade and they have to think about standardized testing. And by the way, that living in the US or Canada is nothing like living in China or India, or my friend in the UK that was telling me about all the standardized testing that happens literally starting in 5th and 6th grade. And those standardized tests impact kind of where you'll go to middle school, where you'll go to high school, which then impacts where you go to college. So there's actually much more pressure, I think, in other countries.
Or it's more choice and money based here almost than where where you got to test into it, and there's a lot of pressure on the kids.
I think that was not, we went through it, but there was just so much pressure, and I feel that there was almost too much pressure. Now that I think back, and I think back to that one person said, where they're going to go to a good school and they're probably going to enjoy kind of wherever they go. So I'm glad that is behind us as parents, the whole kind of schooling, but it is a huge issue. And I think that everybody's situation is unique in terms of whether you're thinking of a private school at kindergarten or 1 through 5 or middle school or high school. But I think Beaverton and Portland does have excellent public schools. We went down the path of, we felt that in the beginning, the public school was great. It was in our neighborhood. We wanted them to have that experience. Both my wife and I went to public schools. And then after a lot of thinking, we went down the path of going to a private school for middle school and then eventually high school.
Yeah, and that's
we don't,
we don't regret it at all.
We don't regret it. Fortunately, we had the income to cover it, but absolutely no regrets. I don't think that it was a life or death decision, and had they gone to a public school, it would have been a disaster. That being said, if I were to do it all over, if my wife and I were to do it all over again, I think we would have made the same choices.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of it could be about the people you're around too, or the friends they have.
There's just a lot of pressure in being parents, and what are other kids doing? But ultimately, you have to make that decision with your partner. And try and block out what everybody is telling you and how bad it is and this and that, and everybody's situation is unique.
Yeah, we'll try something and see what happens, right? That'll be as good as it gets. So while you were doing your corporate jobs, I noticed one thing about your profile and your ethos was that you valued personal coaching and like mentoring people during that time. And it seemed like now you've added that into your business line as one of the things you're willing to do in your PMF Insights days. What does personal coaching mean to you, and what do you find really valuable about that?
Coaching is an important element of, I would say, both my professional side as well as my personal side. Maybe even starting on the personal side. It's not directly related to coaching. Probably one of the best things I've ever done as a parent is coach my kids in sports. Oh, right. And I just, if there's one piece of advice that I would give to you as a parent, that's an emerging parent, is coach your kids or be involved. And it doesn't have to be in sports. I happen to be have a lot of experience playing soccer and coaching soccer. And so for both boys, was very active in coaching their soccer teams. And then that extended to basketball teams as well. So maybe it's that you're into Lego robotics or debating, or that was such a great part of being a parent and such a no-brainer for me, is being a coach.
Why was it so good? What?
It was just so much fun to be a coach. And even our oldest son was coming home this week and we were laughing about, Upward Basketball, which was, I used to call Hoops for Jesus, which was a church-based basketball league for kids from first grade to fifth grade. And we were reminiscing about how fun that was. And I was I'm not a basketball expert, but I was an assistant coach, but we were laughing at what a great time that was. And there's been literally hundreds of games of soccer that I've coached, and it's just such a fond memory.
So your kids look back on it fondly now too. Were they like that at the time, or were they more like, oh gosh, why is my dad here? Like, can I get away from him?
No, I don't. I mean, you'd have to ask them, but I don't think so. I think it was just normal. And it's not even just my own kids. It's just so fun when today I'll see one of the kids I coached, and now they're anywhere from 21 or 23 years old, and they still call me coach, and they're still laughing. And they tell, one of the things I used to tell the soccer team was to get stuck in, which is get in on the tackle. Don't kind of let the person just go by you, get stuck in. And so every time I see this one kid, he's always telling me to get stuck in. So it's not just the boys, it's just all the kids that I've coached over the years. It's just so fun to run into them again. And we just immediately have smiles on our faces. So that's just kind of, as a parent, whether again, it's Lego robotics, whether it's debating, whether it's soccer, basketball, baseball, get involved. It's so much fun. I just can't say that enough. So that coaching may or may not have indirectly led me to leadership coaching, which is different. But I guess there are some similarities. But in around 2017, luckily Intel agreed to pay for my classes at something called the Hudson Institute of Coaching, which is based in Santa Barbara. And I underwent a 9-month program, which involved becoming a leadership coach. And that was great. I enjoyed the coaching and mentoring element of being a manager. And at Intel at the time, there was a very big coaching culture. And so emerging out of that program, I then took on individual clients at Intel. And these would typically be senior engineers. And I would be coaching them on a variety of topics. Maybe they needed to become better at collaboration, or maybe even just simply better communicators, how they could better lead geographical, multi-geo-based teams, and usually would take on 1 or 2 clients at a time. And then when I left Intel, I managed to do the same at Facebook. Facebook didn't have the same coaching culture at Intel, but managed to develop my own practice, again, take 1 or 2 clients, again, typically more on the technical side. And it's something that I've built into my PMF Insights consulting firm. And I do have a leadership coaching element to that as well. So coaching has just been great. And not just in my professional aspect, but even in life. You learn some key traits, which I try and incorporate into my personal life as well, leading with being a better listener and doing more asking questions versus telling people what to do. We were just talking about school choices and things like that. And I don't think it's right for someone to jump in and give advice. I think it's better to elicit kind of their own thoughts and ask them questions, because I know that you and your wife are going to make the best decision on whether Ian Jr. goes to private school or public school. It's far be it for me to give you advice on that. But as a leadership coach, what I can do is kind of draw out through questioning and listening and get you to the solution that you and your wife think is the right solution. So that's an example of coaching, which again is very much on listening and asking questions versus telling people what to do. And so I've used that both professionally, but also even with my wife, where I've tried my best, or my boys or my family, is not to always jump right into advice mode, but be a better listener, try and get to solutions by asking a lot of questions, and really rely on that other person to come up with their own solution.
Yeah, that's great advice and great way to.
But I'm not giving advice.
Great method on how to handle these kind of things,
right?
How to coach people.
Right.
Like one thing I try to do through this podcast is just bring up stories of how other people have done things, right? So that you could have these in your own mind of, oh, when I encounter problem X, I heard those 3 people talk about different ways they handled problem X.
Yeah,
and you could choose your own path, right? but helping people figure out the framework for themselves is kind of what you're talking about. It does seem really important to guide yourself through that. You kind of talked about that at the very beginning of this podcast on your PMF Insights case you were talking about, your friend that's doing the gaming business. It's hard to do that. Sometimes you have this path already set in mind, and you kind of helped him figure out, what are the questions I should be asking myself? How do I answer those questions in order to find the right path for myself and my business?
And that's a great example of, he is much more knowledgeable about the gaming industry than I would be in the role of product advisor or even leadership coach. And so part of my role is to bring, through questioning and listening, kind of bring him to what he believes to be the best solution, not tell him. Yeah,
you're not an expert in that area.
No, I'm not.
You can't tell him what to do.
Exactly. He's the expert, and the solution actually rests within his head, and coaching is all about bringing that out of him. Yeah. And if he comes up with a solution, then he's going to own that solution much more than if somebody is telling him what to do.
In market research, there's a question mark on that same kind of thing. Like, should your market research moderator or your person working on stuff be really familiar with the topic that they're interviewing the people about? Or does it not matter? They could, if it's about gaming, you want to interview some people about gaming. Should the moderator be well-versed in gaming and be an expert in that? Or anybody could do it? It's more about being able to ask the questions.
I think you're right in that if a moderator does have a background in gaming, I know that when we worked together, you did a lot of research into AR at the time. I don't even know if we were calling it VR. You had a background and passion for that, which I think made you an even better researcher versus somebody that is great at asking questions but doesn't necessarily have the context. So I'd say in the perfect world,
know the right questions to ask.
Yeah, somebody should have a bit of a background there. That being said, the basics that we know from our research backgrounds, you shouldn't ask leading questions. You should try and be very open-ended in how you ask questions. But I think that the extent to which you can have a passion or a background does make you probably better able to ask questions.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Tough calls. What other hobbies you've been doing besides all this work stuff?
My favorite hobby continues to be growing fruit.
That's right. I always forget
remember
about
you were asking my advice on apple trees. Is it this house?
Yeah.
Okay, you're gonna have to show it to me.
We went to a party at your house way back in the day, and I saw your whole backyard, which is full of luscious fruits and vegetables that you grow every year, and pack it all into like a relatively small amount of space. You have a huge amount of produce.
In fact, I should have brought you some persimmons. That's a miss. Our persimmon tree is absolutely loaded this year.
Oh wow!
And I've been giving them out left and right. That's really
never had one. I bought one at the store.
Wow,
to try it.
I shouldn't have. But yeah, I mean that's a lot of fun. When we moved up from California, one of the first things we did was plant a lot of fruit trees. I've lost count, but we may have, on just a kind of classic suburban lot, maybe we have 15 to 20 fruit trees, ranging from apples to pears to blackberries, 3 varieties of grapes, persimmons, an odd fruit called quince. Actually, I'm going to bake some quince probably tonight. And
I remember you told me about bees then too. The tube of bees. What are they? Carpenter bees. What are they called?
Yeah, mason bees. I've kind of lost that, but there were several years where I was raising mason bees with the sole purpose being that mason bees are actually much more effective pollinators than classic honeybees. They tend to come out in 57, 58, 59 degrees, whereas the honeybee has to wait a little bit longer.
Good for Oregon or
exactly. So when the apple trees are blossoming, or the plums or pears, the mason bees are very hard workers. But there's a little bit of effort involved in cleaning the tubes and raising them and things like that. But it does mean, back to Intel terms, your yield of fruit will be that much more if you have mason bees.
Yeah. It was a new thing for me. Now I've seen those little tubes and the houses for them all over the place. But
maybe when Ian Jr. is a little bit older, it can be actually a fun activity to help increase
See if
the
we can
yield
capture
of your
some.
apple tree production.
Oh yeah, man. We can look at those if you want. Well, they get nailed by the deer. That's been my big problem. It's just
Oh dear, yeah, don't
or
get me
rabbits,
started.
rabbits and deer.
Yeah.
I think I got to build a fence around them next year.
I'm not a supporter of the deer.
Or I guess I am. That's my problem. Yeah.
Okay.
No, they're eating all my crops.
Yeah.
But
it's just they haven't had an apex predator for a number of years. And so their population is just out of control.
We've got some coyotes around here. I don't think they take the deer down too much.
Deer might
They're
be
big,
a little
though.
bit big.
We had one over to our park. We were just walking out at night and it just like jumped out of the
coyote?
bushes and ran across the park. Yeah. It was insane. And it was
they're quite
large.
stealthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that for cats, that's a bad scene for a cat out at night. In our neighborhood, you'll often see, unfortunately, but I'm actually not a big cat fan, but lost cat. And it usually means that a coyote has had that cat for dinner.
I've heard the owls are a big cat predator as well.
I had not heard that.
And the one of the signs to look for was like, if there's a mess there, it was probably a coyote. But if there's no mess and the cat's just gone, it's more likely it was an owl.
Wow.
And the story I heard additionally to that was that they found the owl's nest. And you know how owls, like, they'll eat the whole thing and then they'll spit out parts or whatever.
Yeah.
But they make a mess around their nest as well, where they're pooping and dropping everything. Anyway, they found the owl's nest and underneath it was like 20 cat collars.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's why they suggest keeping your pets indoors. Or
Right.
the owl just swoops down and takes it right away.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, you've got all this fruit coming in stuff. Are you going to be making anything special for Thanksgiving? Do you have any great recipes from your garden?
Well, actually, this morning before coming, I brined the turkey. And part of that brining process is including thyme from the garden as well as several other herbs. And so we grow those specifically for turkey. I smoke it on a Weber. And so for about 24 hours, we'll put it in a brine mix to get it ready to go.
Yeah, you're not using thyme much else in the season. You're just one little thyme bush.
Right. Yeah, it's literally just for the
just
turkey.
This poultry stuff.
Yeah, it's just for this poultry. I mean, we use the odd time, but its major role is for smoking the turkey on the Weber. And then I was mentioning back when you asked me about the fruit trees, we have this odd fruit called quince, which originates more from the Caspian Sea region, Turkey, parts of Russia. And it is a mix of an apple and a pear, but you can't eat it fresh. It's very hard, and so you have to cook it. And so tonight this isn't a tradition, but maybe I'll be starting a tradition, is I'm going to bake it with a little bit of butter and sugar and cinnamon, bake it for 40 or 60 minutes, and then top it off with a little bit of ice cream. So that'll be a new tradition. And then, as mentioned, we have so many persimmons coming out of our ears.
How do you eat those?
There's a couple schools of thought. I personally like them when they're a little bit crunchy. And then other people like them when they're very soft. And so you could almost eat them like with a spoon. It would be like eating custard. I make a pretty good persimmon bread once they've softened up. So there's a lot of things, but I'm probably eating over the past 3 or 4 weeks, kind of 1 to 3 persimmon a day. It turns out that our dogs, we have 2 cattle dogs, have come to love persimmons as well, and so they're also enjoying them.
They just grab them off the ground, or
one of them, Chaco, actually, we've seen him jump up and grab the persimmon.
A nice fresh one.
And the other one, Indigo, she just eats them when they're on the ground. Yeah.
That's fun. Yeah, do they like clean up the yard that way, or are they more make a mess of it, the dogs?
Yeah, the aftermath of them eating the persimmons is the mess that we have to deal with. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're looking forward to the holidays. You got how do you deal with in-laws coming over and all this stuff? Has it been tough in your family?
This holiday is actually going to be there's not going to be many people. It'll just be one of my sons and his girlfriend and my wife and I, so it'll be fairly straightforward. But typically over Thanksgiving, we have had a lot of people come over. And in one particular instance, we had a lot of my wife's sisters and their families come. Actually, it was kind of 2 or 3 Thanksgivings that we had this, where there was a lot of people in the house. They were staying with us I felt toward the end I was turning into Jay Pritchett from Modern Family, which means kind of angry white guy. But when I think back to it, they were actually, I mostly have fond memories. It was just so much fun. So
What made you get into that mode, or how did you
become Jay Pritchett?
Yeah.
I think it was probably because there was too many people in the house, or I was getting tired of cleaning and making so many meals. I think I turned into Jay Pritchett possibly on
what's
Sunday
the right
morning.
amount of time have you found for people to stay at the house? Like is it 2 days or like a week, or like how long can people stay before they get guests in general?
Yeah, I think it really is 3 days, like fish, that saying.
I don't know.
After 3 days, the fish stinks. But yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great to have family and come over and stay. It's awesome. But yeah, I think a couple of days is good.
Yeah. There's this weird balance too of like entertaining versus just trying to live your life, or as a person stays longer and longer.
Yeah, totally, because people are so busy and they have their routine. One of the things that we try and do to the best of our ability is, if we're staying with somebody, and I credit my parents to this, we will take that family out we'll make sure that we take them out to dinner one of the nights, because I think it can get tiresome if somebody's always cooking and cleaning and doing that. And I think it's really great when you're staying with somebody to one of the nights pick and say, hey, dinner's on us tonight. Pick your favorite restaurant. I think that's a great family tradition.
All right. Tip of the day.
Yeah. Tip of the day for
Sounds
sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you want to talk about, or should we call it here? And
I think it's good. I think it's fantastic you're doing this. I'm so impressed with your setup, and not just how you've done it technically, but again, before the podcast, you were explaining to me getting on podcast, on Spotify, on Apple, your YouTube channel. I think it's very entrepreneurial of you to do this. And I think that is a new way going forward, which is very different in that a lot of people do have side hustles. And it's not just about, I have this corporate job or I have this W-2 job. Yes, that's largely the case, but in many cases, the way that technology has evolved, it really does enable a lot of these side hustles. So I think it's fantastic that you're doing this.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful to get it to be this thing I can do on the side, have another main project I'm doing, and then this production gets streamlined enough that it's easy. It's still pretty challenging, but I'm getting better at it.
It's as working with these startups, it's really hard in the beginning, and nobody's making any money in the beginning, but there's patience and perseverance. Yeah. And, eventually as you get more and more people doing this and become even better, you're doing a great job in asking questions, and you'll get better over time.
Yeah.
And it's just going to compound on itself. And soon you're going to have this great side gig going.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be a nice goal. I think that it's just cruising along. And one of the main reasons I did it was just to reconnect with friends and build my network that way, or just,
totally. Yeah.
Be in touch with people. And so,
and not everybody
that happens regardless of whatever else.
Not everybody needs to listen to Benjamin Netanyahu or Elon Musk. Like, yes, those things are interesting, but I think it is your focus on just having everyday normal people come and share their thoughts is intriguing.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. Hopefully it'll be useful. All right, well, thank you very much. And
thank you, Ian.
Talk again soon.
Okay.
Thanks a ton for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time, friends.